Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another podcast. We would like to thank our sponsor, Sodexo. Sodexo improves the quality of life for employees by providing facility management services such as janitorial, food, maintenance, and security. To find out more about Sodexo, please visit our show notes below.
Thank you, Stephanie, for coming on the podcast. Stephanie is the CEO of Energy and Resources for North America. We've been looking forward to getting to know you more and share your story with our listeners.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm excited to be here.
Well, let's just start from the beginning. Where did you grow up and what was life like as Stephanie?
Yeah, so I grew up in Pasadena, Texas, so southeast side of Houston, very industrial part of town. My father was an engineer at one of the refineries out on 225 and wanted to live close to work, so we lived in Pasadena. My mother had taught school until I was born, and then she decided to stay home with me, and I was an only child, so I felt like the world revolved around me.
Yeah, tell me more about being an only child. I have a brother, so I'm not sure what that would be like.
And I'm an only child. So I
know. So there you go.
I know what you mean. The world does revolve around us.
I'm not sure I appreciated it when I was a child, but now as an adult, I realize it was a pretty good gig. But yeah, just tell you a little bit more about my family. So my father's father immigrated from Germany. He was a bricklayer and didn't have the opportunity to go to college. And so he certainly emphasized education for his children. And then my father was the first in his family to go to college. He went to Texas A&M. That will come up again later in my story. Mm-hmm. And then my mother was also the first in her family to go to college. And it was always very important to her that she had that college degree, even though she chose to stay home and take care of me. She always encouraged me as I was growing up, saying like, look, it's very important to get an education. Even me who stays home and is supported by your father, I know if anything ever happened to him, I could go back to work. And so it was always very clear in my household that I would go to college and that was an expectation, and likely grad school as well, because, each generation after an immigrant family has to achieve more than the one prior to that.
Yeah. So what did you end up studying in university?
Yeah, so I did chemical engineering. I chose to go to Texas A&M. I mentioned that my father's an Aggie. I was brainwashed from birth. So
I was about to say, did he pressure you? Was it you a big Aggie family? Everything was going to be maroon and white, and Aggie was the way to go, and there's no better way?
Absolutely. We went to a football game every year, and if the Aggies won, I got to go to the bookstore and pick out a T-shirt. And if we lost, we got straight in the car and drove home. So my father was a diehard football fan. And so again, brainwashed from birth, started taking friends, was allowed to bring a friend with me starting in middle school to the game. So we tried to brainwash all of my friends as well. And so I only applied to one college. It was the only place I applied. I got, at the time, if you were in the top 10% of your class, you were automatic admit. So there wasn't all the drama around college acceptances that a lot of my friends are going through with their kids right now.
So you were in top 10% of your
yeah.
Oh, wow. That's so great. Okay. And you excelled in high school in math and science, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I think, math and science is my strength. My father's an engineer. My uncle's an engineer. If you grow up in Pasadena, if you want a good job, you pretty much become an engineer. And so I didn't really know, it's not like I knew all the landscape of the options that were out there. I just knew that I could get a good job if I pursued that, and I liked math and science. And so, and when you go up to A&M, a good chunk of the students are in engineering. So it seemed like a good fit.
So quick one, why did you decide to do chemical versus like petroleum, since you are in Texas and Houston?
Yeah, so my father's a mechanical engineer and my uncle's a chemical engineer. So I told you my father worked at the refinery. So every morning he put on his fire retardant blue suit, Nomex suit, and got in his car and went to the refinery. And his car, so refineries were a little different back in the 70s and 80s than maybe they are today. But his car always smelled bad and the paint was peeling off. And then my uncle, who did chemical engineering, was a consultant. And so he wore suits to work and went to downtown Dallas to an office, and he traveled the world and he met with clients all over the place. And I said, well, chemical engineering looks a lot better than chemical engineering. And then I'm sure we'll get to this, but I graduate chemical engineering And then my first job is in a chemical plant on the southeast side of Houston, where I wear fire retardant clothing and go into work every day. So I'm not sure it was the most educated decision that I made, but you have the influences you do, and you look at the information when you're 18 and you make a choice. And so I'm not sure it was a particularly thoughtful choice, but that's why I chose chemical.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your time as being an Aggie? Did you enjoy A&M?
Oh, I loved A&M. I mean, I wouldn't change anything about it. I said it was the only school I applied to. I didn't visit any other schools, but it was great experience for me. And, I always tell people it's a really big college, but once you get into the engineering program and you find your family, and, there's just so many things you can be. I was very active in the student body there and different organizations and stuff along the way. So it was a really great experience.
So you said your first job was at a chemical or refinery. What was it?
It was at a Celanese chemical plant out on the southeast side of Houston.
Can you tell us a little bit about your first day there and what that was like?
Yeah. So I had the opportunity to do a couple internships when I was at A&M. And so I interned one summer with Dow down in Lake Jackson, and I interned one summer down at Celanese. So I had been at the plant before for the summer and had the offer to come back full time. So, it was a lot of fun. I will say, there were a lot of young engineers at the plant. And so there was a social community there as well. I was in the carbon monoxide unit, and I was a process engineer. So there were 4 of us when I started. And so I spent a lot of time out in the unit with the operators trying to figure out how to improve the facility and how to get more throughput. And so it was a great first job. I think one of the, if you ask me, sort of eye-opening experiences in the first couple of years there, I studied all this engineering, this technical stuff, right? And so I get out there, my first job, I'm trying to increase the size of this line so we can get more throughput through the facility. And I did all the work. And I went to my boss, I said, okay, here's what we need to do to increase the size of the line. And then he said to me, well, should we do that? I was like, what do you mean, should we? He's like, well, is it worth the investment? How much is it going to cost? And is it going to make us money? I'm like,
oh, wow.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how to do that. I know how to size the line and how to size the valve. And so, it's funny. You learn all these technical skills in school, and then you have to go apply them in the real world and realize that, oh, there's more to it than just sizing the line.
Yeah. So run us a little bit with your career. So that was your first job. Where did you go next? And I'm assuming you left, you quit and went to somewhere else. And how was that like to be like quitting your first job in the real world? That always takes a lot of guts.
Yeah. So I had been there a couple of years, and I kind of knew going in that I did not want to be in the plant environment. Again, I mentioned my dad, he was at the refinery for 38 years. He loved it there. I knew even after my 2 summer internships that I probably wasn't going to want to be a career technical person in the plant environment. And I debated, straight out of school, should I go to the plant, or should I go into sales, or should I go get an MBA, or should I go do something different? Because I don't think this is my lifelong calling here. And the encouragement I got at the time was, look, you can, if you leave the technical path, you can't go back. But if you go to the technical path, you can always decide later to go into something less technical. So I said, okay, well, I'll go to the plant. And again, great first job, learned a ton. But after doing it for a couple of years, I said, this is not what I want to do forever. And the options there at the plant were, I'd been a process engineer in the carbon monoxide unit. And I said, well, what's next for me? And they said, well, you're going to be a process engineer in the acetic acid unit. I'm like, I don't really want to be a process engineer. I want to do something different. And yet they're looking at me going, you've got 2 years of experience. What else could you go do? I mean, you've got to get in. When you're 24, you feel like you know everything. And I look back and say, it wouldn't have hurt me to spend a few more years there, but I got antsy. And so I started trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And I ended up going to Harvard Business School straight out of Celanese. And it's a little embarrassing to talk about sort of how I ended up there, because I'd like to say that it was a very thoughtful choice, and, I'd had this plan. But the truth is, my friend Jeff was in line at the grocery store, and he was looking through the U.S. News and World Report that lists the top business school programs. And they listed the bottom in little fine print the starting salaries of the people who graduate from these programs. And he called me and he said, Stephanie, do you know how much these people make that go to these MBA programs? And I'll date myself here, but I was making a brand new engineer at a chemical plant, which I got one of the highest starting salaries coming out of A&M at the time, but it was $45,000. which is a good salary today still, but I think it's gone up by more than double that now.
Yeah.
But at the time, if you graduated from the MBA program from one of these top 10 schools, they were
Six
making
figures.
double. Yeah, they were making double what I was making. And I'm like, for a 2-year investment of my time, I can come out and make double? Like, that's an obvious choice. Of course, I should go try to do that. And so I applied to, 5 of the top schools and figured it was a crapshoot. I don't know if I'll get into any of them. And I got into Harvard. And so I said, well, I guess I'm going to Harvard. And I mentioned earlier, going to undergrad, I didn't apply to any other school. So I had never been through this process before. I had never thought about going outside of the state of Texas for school. I had barely been outside of the state at this point in my life because we didn't travel when I was growing up. It was very much a middle-class family. We didn't have money to go on vacations. I think we went to Disney World once and Disneyland once, but that was kind of it. We went to Longview and Shreveport and Dallas for vacation to see my family. That's what we did. And so I had traveled a little bit on my own since I had graduated. That was important to me and had started to do that. But really I hadn't ever considered moving away from Texas. So this was a big deal to move to Boston.
And Harvard must have been a huge accomplishment. Your parents must have been so proud.
They were pretty proud. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think my dad's still writing that one.
That's amazing. So how old were you at the time?
25. So
Okay.
I'd been out of school. I'd been out of undergrad about 2.5 years when I started at HBS.
And did you have kids back then? Were you married? What was that like? Because I'm assuming that would have been very difficult to do.
Yeah, no, I was single. When I applied to business school, I was completely single. So wasn't dating anybody, certainly didn't have any kids on the horizon. I met my now husband 3 months before I moved to Boston.
Oh.
So that was not part of my master plan at all.
So how'd that process work? You met your husband, now you're about to move to Boston, or you met who is now your husband, and then you were, applying and going to Harvard. What happened?
Yeah, so he had just finished his PhD at Brown and just moved back to Houston. And as he put it, he moved back to Texas to meet a nice Texas girl. And the first thing I said when I met him was, I'm moving to Boston. But we hit it off, and we did the long distance thing the whole time I was up there. And he was working for McKinsey at the time, so he was consulting and traveling a lot. So we owe McKinsey a lot because the way it works there is when you're consulting and you're traveling, you can either fly home or you can fly somewhere else. So kind of every other weekend he'd come home, and every other weekend he'd come see me. And so it's funny when we go back for reunions, a lot of my colleagues think he was the student because he was around so much on the weekends for all the social stuff. I'm like, no, I was the student. He just came to visit.
That's awesome. So what happened after Harvard? Did you end up applying somewhere else?
Yeah, so I think, look, HBS was an amazing experience for me. I mean, I think anybody who goes there would tell you it's just an eye-opening experience for everyone. But particularly because I'd had a pretty sheltered upbringing. Again, I mentioned earlier, I picked engineering because I didn't really know what else was out there. So I didn't know what investment banking was. I didn't know there were so many jobs that I got exposed to, and frankly, even just industries and things that I had never considered, that I said, well, I really don't want to I'm not ready to make the choice of what the rest of my career looks like now. I want to put off that decision. And so I ended up going to McKinsey doing management consulting. I had interned there before I went to business school, which is where I met my husband. But I ended up going back there for full-time work and really felt like I didn't think I wanted to be a lifelong consultant, but I knew that it was a place where I could learn a lot and I could see a lot and I could sort of put off the decision longer of what I really wanted to do long-term.
Mm-hmm.
And it was definitely all those things. Now I was out of the Houston office, so still very energy focused. Most of the work that I worked on while I was there was energy related, but very widespread. So everything from refineries to power to upstream oil and gas to procurement studies to strategy turnarounds, M&A work. I got to see a lot of variety of stuff while I was there. And so ended up being there for about 4 years, became an engagement manager. And then, you kind of hit a point at the firm where you say, well, I'm either going to stay and I'm going to be a partner, or I might as well go find the next thing I want to do. And so after being there for again, about 4 years, I said, I think it's time for me to look around and see what else might be out there. And McKinsey's great. They give you search time because they realize you're so busy when you're working that you're not going to have time to look for anything else anyway. And they'd rather you not be distracted from your clients by doing some of that stuff. So they give you search time when you decide that you're ready to leave the firm. And so I had the beauty of having a few months to really look and canvas. And so I hit my alumni networks hard, whether it was A&M network or the McKinsey network or the HBS network, and just started calling people up and saying, hey, what do you, I want to know more about your company. I want to know more about your job and your career and what you did. And it was a great experience to get to do that. I highly encourage, you don't have to be looking for a new job, by the way, to do that. You should always be reaching out and building those connections. But I got to meet some really interesting people doing that. It was a good time in the economy, ended up with a number of job offers, but ended up deciding to go to a company called PSC, Environmental Services. So PSC had gone through 2 bankruptcies and had just been bought out by Carl Icahn out of New York. And the Icahn and Associates group was looking to change out the management team. And, I had offers from everything from sort of Exxon and Oxy, big companies, to some startups that were, not even off the ground. And for me, this one, it was a meaty enough company. It was big enough that I felt like, okay, this isn't a startup. I'm not going to be, putting together employment manuals. Like there's actually there's a business here. But it's small enough that at that stage of my career where I felt like I could go in and move the needle. Like I would be able to look after being there for 2 years and look back and say, I made this happen.
Yeah.
And I was a little concerned at the larger companies that it just would be a long time before I got into a role that I could really do that. A bit naive. I mean, I look back and a company that's been through 2 bankruptcies, and I had just blind optimism that of course we could fix it. And we did. But I think I got a little lucky there that, it could have gone differently, but there was a lot of opportunity in that business to fix things and turn around. And the rest of the management team that they hired and brought in was very good. And so it was a good experience. It was supposed to be come in for 3 years and turn it around and move on to the next one. And 3 years turned into 7 years. I had my first child while I was there. And it turned into 7 years because there was still interesting work to do and I was enjoying being there. So
do you feel like this was a pivotal time in your career, was going to that company and changing that company around?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I mean, first of all, when you're in at a company like that with a turnaround, there's so much work to do and there's so little people to do it that you kind of just get to, raise your hand, say, I'll do it. There's none of this, that's not your job, don't work on that. It's kind of like you just get to do so many different things. And I got really lucky. I had been there about a year, so I was in a strategy role. And that's, when you come out of consulting, that's what most people want to hire you to do. So I was put in a strategy role, but I'd been there a year. And PSC had 3 major product lines. They had a heavy industrial cleaning, hazardous waste hauling, and then this much smaller tank cleaning business. So they cleaned out the interior of tanker trucks. And again, the 2 bigger product lines were the ones that got all the lion's share of the attention. And then there was this sort of third one that was much smaller. And the guy running it quit. And the CEO at the time came to me and said, Stephanie, can you go run this thing? Just go babysit it for a little while. I'm not ready to hire. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. It's small. It's not core. I don't know if we're going to keep it or not. Can you just go babysit it for a little while? And then, we'll figure it out. And I was like, I have a chance to go run a P&L? Absolutely. I'll go do that. And so, here I am. I must be about 30 at this stage. I was pretty young in my career, had not had the opportunity to have a P&L job, got to just jump right in. And we did a lot. That role ended up lasting a year. We improved the business substantially. I was probably one of the, so amazing, a great group of people, right? So, most of the people who run these tank wash businesses, imagine them, they're kind of glorified car washes, right? It's more technical than a car wash, but it's small locations, a handful of employees each one, spread out across the United States. Most of the people who run these facilities, you were the best, you got hired on to wash tanks. the best tank washer became the shift supervisor, the best shift supervisor became the site manager. So they knew the business really well, but they most of them did not have any kind of formal education, didn't have a lot of tools to assess how they were running their business. So there was a lot of stuff we were able to do to just give them visibility into, these are the levers that make a business, profitable or not, or comparing best practices across locations. They had all sort of worked on their own. And so it was a really, talk about learning experience for me to go from, not having a P&L to learning how to work with all men. No women to be found anywhere, really mostly in PSC, but particularly in the tank wash business. And here you've got this, 30-year-old female who's in there. And the last thing I told anybody when I showed up was that I went to Harvard. That's not what you lead with when you're going out to these locations. So.
How do you feel mentorship helped you through this time? Do you feel like that was a big influence in your career, especially at 30? Did you have any mentors that were helping you through this time?
I think at that particular time, one of my best mentors is a woman that I would still call one of my best friends today. She was just about she's about 5 years older than me. So it's not like she's a real, she was much more senior. She was our general counsel at PSC. But I told you I had my first child while I was there, and trying to learn how to navigate working full time in a job where there's travel with a young child at home. It was really helpful to have somebody who was just a little further along the curve, that had done all of that, who had navigated all that, to just give you advice, to help you to be your sanity check. And so, it may sound a little different. It's not, when you think of a typical mentor, I think you typically think about career moves and preparing you for the next role. But honestly, I think, again, I had seen so few women in senior positions at this point in my career, being in a chemical plant, and then even at McKinsey, which you would think maybe should have more. There was one woman there who was wonderful, who also is still a mentor to me today, but that was it. There was really only one. And then PSC. So it's, I think it's really important to find people who are just, they may not be that much further along the curve than you, but there are further along the curve that can help you navigate and think through those choices.
Because they just did it and they're cheering you on, and it's kind of like that light at the end of the tunnel, like, okay, she did it and she's successful. And
for our listeners that might not have the ability to have a mentor like that, can you give us some examples or some tips that she maybe gave you along the way, especially having children during that time had to have been difficult? I know I read in a 2018 interview that you had, you talked about the difficulties in breastfeeding while traveling. So I know that could be a touchy subject, but it's real, right? So like what kind of advice or what,
okay. So she's the one that helped me navigate exactly that situation. So here I am traveling, and I've got this newborn baby, and I'm nursing, and I'm like, I go to her office and said, I've got to take this trip. I guess I'm just going to have to stop nursing, because there's no way. I can't do this. There's no way. She's like, oh, Stephanie, no, you can't. This is what you do. And, it was just really practical advice. So, there was some very practical advice she gave me. So for those of you who've been through this, you may already know this, but, these pumps come with all these attachments. And you've got to pump while you're at work, right? And it's embarrassing to go into the kitchen with all these attachments and be cleaning them out. She was like, you want to go buy a whole bunch of sets of attachments, so you never have to clean them. You can just put them in your bag in the room, and then you can take them home and clean them all later.
Extras.
Yeah, like just have, they're not, you sit there go, oh my God, they're kind of expensive. It's like, no, just go invest in like 3 or 4 sets of these things, so you don't have to be going into the kitchen and cleaning them out. It's just like, you're going to call your hotel, and you're going to tell them you need a refrigerator in your room. That's where you're not even going to throw out the milk. You're going to store it all, and you're going to ship it. You're going to overnight at home. All of this.
That is great advice.
And so really, like, it can be done. And then you have to decide. I think today it's a little more accepted. Frankly, it hasn't been all that long, but I didn't want to tell people I was pumping, so I was trying to be secretive about when it was time to pump. So I put these things on my calendar, like, private meeting. And I was fortunate I did have an office with a door, so I could just kind of shut my door and stay in there. Open concept might make it a little harder, but I do think it's just, I think you guys will have the benefit of it's a little bit more accepted. There tend to be pumping
Mhm.
rooms and
I
things
think
like
there is
that.
pumping rooms.
But, you
In my
know, I
office,
mean,
yeah.
I remember there was one trip I made to Houma, Louisiana, to one of my tank wash places, and I didn't want to tell them. I mean, it's all men and, you know,
Mhm.
new in my job. And I'm like, I'm going to have to pump as soon as I get to the office. Like, absolutely when I walk in that door, because I've got to fly, I've got to, you know, get in the car, I've got to drive, like, absolutely when I get there. So I told them I had this very important call I've got to make as soon as I get there. And anyway, so I, you know, and then I was like, I need an office. I need an office with a door because it's a closed door conversation. And they did. They set me all up, and you know, I just went in there, and it was very discreet for, you know, half an hour, and then I came out, and my call was over, and then I was trying to, you know, put it in my little with my little ice packets, keep the milk
Mhm.
cold, and so anyway, there are definitely ways around all that stuff,
So
but you
how
got to be creative, and it's helpful to know somebody who's done it, so you can think through those things.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And how about your husband during this time? I'm assuming he must have been insanely supportive to help you succeed as well. Can you tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
his role?
Yeah, he's amazing. So my husband's a medical device entrepreneur, so he works full time as well. So you know, it's always a challenge at our house. We've also had the benefit of being able to have amazing nannies along the way that have been very helpful too. It definitely takes all three of us, because there are times when his career is crazy and I've got to step up. There are times when mine's crazy and he's got to step up. And there's times that we're thankfully both looking at our nanny going, we need more help. You know, you've
Yeah.
got to help us through this. So I definitely, like, I think if I have any advice for young women that want to work full time and want to have a family, it's incredibly important who you choose to do that with. It's
Mhm.
not to say that it can't be done. And there are women who do it on their own, and there are lots of different, there's no one model that works, but man,
Mhm.
it's a lot easier if you've got a really supportive spouse who, you know, really, I mean, at our house, I would say it is really 50-50, you know, in regards to helping with the kids, helping with their homework, getting the dishes cleaned up. I mean, it's kind of all of that stuff. We've really approached it as it's a 50-50 household.
That's awesome.
Did y'all do daycare, or did y'all have somebody there for that, or did y'all trade that off too, or how'd that work?
We've had a nanny most of the time. We did, so when they were really little, you know, they were home with a nanny, but when they got to be literally like 2, my husband and I are both very extroverted, and my kids are too. They needed friends. They needed to get out of the house. They wanted more. And so we did Montessori. And so they went to a little Montessori school starting at a pretty young age. And they loved that. Yeah, they loved having that school environment. And so we would have you know, they'd be at school, drop them off at school in the morning, and then the nanny would pick them up and then stay until we could get home. So.
Well, that's really great advice. So what happened after you did your stint with what was it? The acronym
PSC.
PSC. Yes, sorry, the acronym
Yeah.
I was messing up. PSC. And then you moved on. So how did that look, and when did you finally end up at Sodexo?
Yeah, so I had been at PSC for about 7 years when a recruiter called about a role at Exterran. And again, you know, I had moved, I did that tank wash role for about a year. In 7 years at PSC, I did a bunch of different things, but I was back in strategy at that point. And frankly, the company had gotten to a point where it was time we had turned it around, and it was either time to sell off the pieces or figure something else to do with it. And I got a call about a really exciting opportunity with Exterran to run sales and marketing there. And so I made the move and ended up spending 7 years at Exterran, about half that time doing sales and marketing and about half that time running a product line business. So manufacturing of compressors and production equipment and process and treating plants for the oil patch. And after being there for about 7 years, got a call from a good friend of mine and colleague and professional colleague to say he was doing a startup and would I come join him and do it with him. And so that was Tally Energy Services. And so I made that move and spent almost 2 years there. And, you know, we did 9 acquisitions in 18 months. And you know, the expectation when I came in was that I would end up rolling into, we did directional drilling, completions, and artificial lift. And the thought was we'd spend the first couple of years doing acquisitions, and then I would end up running one of those divisions as we went forward. But it turned out we bought companies with great leaders. And I'm looking around going, I think if we get all these acquisitions done, I may not have a job when this is over. And so we had a heart to heart about it, which was fine. It's like, look, if there's not the right role, then, I'll move on from there. And so we decided I would leave there. This would have been May of last year. And oddly enough, my husband also was exiting the medical device startup that he had been with for 9 years at the same time. And the children were getting out of school. And so we decided we were going to take the summer off and go travel. And I was not going to even look for a job until we got back at the end of the summer. And so we did do that. My kids are 12 and 7 now. And so we spent June in Europe, July in Argentina, and August in Cambodia, which, by the way, I highly recommend a sabbatical at some point in time in your career. It's an amazing experience. But then I got the call about this Sodexo job in May, right before we left. And I was like, I wasn't even going to look for anything until I got back. But I told the recruiter, I said, this job sounds like it's a great fit. It sounds really like what I want to do. And so they said, well, look, I think the timing might actually work out okay if you can interview kind of while you're traveling. And so I literally did. I had an interview in the car in France, in Normandy. I had interviews in Argentina, in our Airbnb. I had, just wherever I would just sort of do interviews along the way. And we got back at the end of August and I got the job offer and I started in September. So it worked out super.
Amazing. Yeah.
So moving from those companies, like what were some biggest challenges that you faced? Because you did have very high roles at each company that you moved to before you got to Sodexo.
And they also seem to be very male dominated in all the moves that you did. So yeah, what is, I guess, the biggest challenge that you face being a woman in all these companies?
Yeah. So look, I think that's there's a couple questions embedded in there, right? Like, which are the biggest challenges? What's difficult about being a woman in a male-dominated environment? So, I think the moves, the one thing that's been consistent, so I have moved a fair amount. So I am what they call a jack of all trades and a master of none. Like, I do not have a deep expertise in directional drilling or in facilities, even, where I am now, Sodexo. I hadn't done anything in facilities management services, but I've got a consistent theme around energy services. So I understand the energy business and I understand services businesses, whether it was washing tanks, directional drilling, manufacturing equipment for the patch, like kind of the services angles are the same. And so I rely heavily on that experience of, what are the things that matter to customers? How do you communicate with customers? How do you, again, getting back to strategy and sales and marketing, those are my strengths. And I try to bring those to each job. But then on the other hand, I think anytime you're going into an industry that's new to you, you just have to be ready to learn and you have to be open-minded and you got to get out in the field. You've got to get out there and spend time with people that are on the front line. And, frankly, it's one of my biggest challenges right now with COVID is I haven't been able to, I was traveling a whole bunch when I first joined Sodexo. I was trying to get out to sites, see them. And now it's just been put on hiatus. And it's very difficult, I think, when you haven't been in the business all that long and you haven't gotten to see all the sites and you haven't met all these managers in person that you're trying to communicate with now over Skype or over the phone. So look, those are some of the, I think pluses and minuses when you move. You can when you go to a new role, you can bring in fresh perspective, you can bring some new insights, and at the same time, you've just got a steep learning curve, particularly anytime you're working in a new part of the value chain. And being a woman, look, again, I think that has its pluses and minuses too. I will say there are more, Sodexo very much values diversity and inclusion. I am working with more women now than in the entire rest of my career combined. Like, I have never worked with this many women, and it's really nice. Like, we go have lunches and we talk about things besides hunting and fishing.
Yes.
It's like things I actually care about. And so that's really great. But at the same time, look, I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of really great men. I'll be the first to admit, like, I have never had a situation where I felt like someone asked me to do something inappropriate, or, I've had great men who have shepherded me through my career, who have been mentors and sponsors for me that, and I will say this, those relationships I think are harder for women to form because I think in nature, we tend to want to mentor and sponsor people who remind us of ourselves and kind of we have a lot in common with. And so sometimes those relationships are harder to forge for women. And I'm hopeful that for your generation coming up, that the men are just more cognizant of it. I think we're doing more around unconscious bias training and frankly, even doing things like just assigning them, like, okay, you're going to mentor her and you're going to make sure that, she sticks around. That's your job. As part of your job is to make sure she stays here. And I think those relationships are difficult to force. There has to be a personal connection there or it's not going to work. But I think there are things that we're doing, and I think that just in general it will be. And look, as more women stick around and stay around, there's more opportunities there just to have that natural connection too. I've had women tell me when I've left roles, you've been such an inspiration for me. You've been such a great influence on my career, and I'm like, I've hardly spent any time with you. How can you say that? And they're like, you were just there. You were in a role and you have kids and a family and you did it. And I'm like, it's inspiring. Oh, wow. Okay. Wish I'd spent more time with you. But, I think as more of us stick around and make it through, then that helps as well.
No, we love everything you've said, especially because this is one of the reasons why Jamie and I wanted to start the podcast was we both had such a great career. We've had great mentors. We've worked with great men, and we've never really felt that, negativity side of being a woman. And that's why we wanted to share it to the world and say, you can have a great career here. Like there's nothing stopping you, so it's really great to hear you say the exact same things we've been saying. So
I think it's super that you guys are doing this. I would have loved something like this when I was early in my career to listen to, just to, and there are a number, there's a great group that I've become involved with in the last couple of years that McKinsey put together that is executive women in energy. And, it's got, basically, all the heavy hitters you can think of, Vicky Holub and Lynn Elson Hans. And all of these women who have made it in oil and gas are on the advisory council. And then they've reached down sort of to my, next layer down, they're my group. There's probably about 40 or 60 of us. And you get that group of women in a room together, man, I think we could solve any problems in the world. It's an amazing group of women. And part of our charter is to figure out, how do we get that next layer down to stay in the industry, to get the promotions, to have the connections? And so that's part of what we're working on, is how do we make that happen? And so it's a really tremendous group.
That's really something that we need in our industry. I'm really glad to hear that you're doing that. For all of our listeners, to wrap it up, what kind of advice would you give to women and men in the industry on how to be just as successful as, you have a very successful career. What is one thing that that maybe you didn't learn in school that was more taught during your time, during your career, that you could provide to our listeners?
I think the first thing I'd say is just work hard, be a hard worker, raise your hand. I often see people like, I don't have enough to do. Well, raise your hand and say something if you don't have enough to do, or volunteer to help out with something else. Don't just sort of wait for things to come to you. And then, kind of following those lines, it is reach out, make connections, particularly when you're young in your career. Like, you can call the CEO and you can say, hey, can I take you to lunch one day? I would just really like to understand your career and how it's gone. And we love those opportunities. We don't necessarily know you to actually invite you to lunch, but we're happy if you reach out. And so building those connections in your companies higher up in the ranks, raising your hand when there's special projects. Sometimes those things can seem like they're not in your direct, like maybe that's not the best career move because it's not the next promotion. But like, often the most interesting opportunities come out of those things that are lateral, that are off to the side, those special projects. Again, like that opportunity I had to run the tank wash division, it wasn't a promotion, it wasn't a new, but it was an amazing opportunity. And so, take advantage of those, and just, you've got to let people know when you're not being challenged. So if you're not in a position where you're learning and growing, make sure you figure out how to create those opportunities for yourself, whether it's expanding what you're doing at work, whether it's raising your hand, whether it's getting involved in something outside of work. You want to always be learning and growing. And we don't always, even in companies where we've got really thoughtful career development plans and we have conversations, we don't always know, right? We don't always see it. And so you've got to manage your own career, and you've got to be the one. And if your company's not doing it, then yeah, maybe it's time to look around and find somewhere else where you can get those opportunities. So
wow. That was amazing. It's yeah.
I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that with us. I think that's great advice, and I believe that will definitely impact our listeners, especially just hearing your story, and then hearing also how you just mentioned that those new opportunities that you took on within the company wasn't a promotion. It's not like they promoted you, gave you a new title. You took that on yourself and added that to your plate, even without the title or without what might have came with it. But you did that in order to learn more, which is great.
Yeah, and I think we could end it here with, you can steer your career into whatever you want to become. It's really up to us to ask, like you said, say I want to do it, and not be worried about not having the skills to do it. Like, I don't know if I can manage a P&L. I've always been worried, but it's about, like, it seems like you've just taken all the challenges and been like, let's do it. And that's what it takes to be successful.
yeah, one closing note there, and because I know a lot of your listeners are women. I think women generally don't raise their hand unless they feel like they check all the boxes, unless I've got all the experience and I'm really ready. Whereas I've noticed as a manager that men will raise their hand very early, and they may only have half of the skill sets that you want on the page, but they'll raise their hand.
Yeah.
And so I do think we've got to raise our hand. I've been on the alumni board at Harvard Business School, and they gave a presentation on the admittance statistics, and they had admitted a larger percentage of female applicants than male applicants. And so one of the men on the board raised his hand and said, well, are we lowering the bar so we can get more women into the program? And the admissions director, who is amazing, just like, absolutely not. Our average female applicant is more qualified than our average male applicant. And so, I think women look through those, MBA books or whatever, and they're like, well, if I don't have the GPA and I don't have the years of work, if I don't have all the criteria, I don't apply. And I think we've got to just start raising our hand. And frankly, I also think that, I fell for this many times. It's like, well, if I just work hard, they'll notice me and they'll give me the promotion. You got to raise your hand. You got to say, I want it. I want to do it. I want to, And so that's a strong word of encouragement for women out there, is don't feel like you have to have everything. You're going to continue to learn across your career, and nobody's fully prepared for any role that they go into. And if you are, then you probably should be shooting higher than that anyway.
I love it. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. And Stephanie, thank you again for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes. So
this was really fun.
I really enjoyed listening to your story and hearing more, and the advice is just great. And also, for all of our listeners, if you enjoyed this podcast, please rate, review. You can find us at flippingthebarrel.com as well. And you can also find Stephanie on LinkedIn. And we're glad that y'all all stayed in and tuned in for this one.
Thank you.